What's up, y'all? I'm back. TJ Rance is making his long-awaited return just in time for the offseason because news like that's going to be dropping every 5 minutes. So, yeah, here we are. James Harden is doing it again. He's going to get traded. It's been reported by Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN, Shams Charania of The Athletic, Chris Haynes of Bleacher Report. All the big fish have gotten to this, so it's probably going to happen, but James Harden is opting in to his $35.6 million player option, and he's seeking a trade from the Philadelphia 76ers. And there are a few reasons for this, but it starts on Christmas, because going back to Christmas Day of 2022, the Sixers were getting ready to play the Knicks, and then like 45 minutes before the game, Woj hops on the set and just drops this. He goes, yeah, James Harden is exploring a potential reunion to the Houston Rockets, and it kind of blew everyone away at the time because it was like, why? Like, we get James Harden liked it there, we get it. We get he liked the clubs too, but the Rockets are trash. Like, they were the worst team in the league at the time, I want to say. I think they might have finished as the worst team. Maybe that was Detroit. It might have been Detroit, but Houston was very close to being the worst team in the league this past season. So an aging superstar who can no longer carry a team like he did in his prime, returning to the place that he played in his prime that is now bad, didn't make a whole lot of sense. But I mean, I get it. His family's there and blah, blah, blah. All that played into it. But anyways, this shocked a lot of people at the time, and it made no sense because Philly was a good team. The season keeps progressing, and all of a sudden, this rumor starts to gain more and more traction. And now it's become a real possibility. So the Sixers then get eliminated by the Celtics in the playoffs. And these reports about the Sixers internally start dropping. Like, oh, James Harden and Doc Rivers had issues and that the only way he'd re-sign in Philly is if Rivers got canned. And then all of a sudden, a day after that drops, Doc Rivers gets fired. And I forget where I heard this interview, but Doc Rivers hopped on an interview with someone, again, don't remember who, and he was talking about like the difficulties of coaching James Harden, and he brought up like how he was using him, about how he was trying to make him a playmaker as much as possible and, you know, kind of steer away from bad shot selection, whatever. He was going on some sort of tangent like that. And I was just thinking to myself, like, James Harden is an all otherworldly playmaker. Like, he's an awesome playmaker, but you can't put him in this box like that, because I feel like Doc Rivers was definitely one of the reasons James Harden was so passive during this past postseason, because obviously we saw the 45-point performance in Game 1. We saw the 42-point performance in, I believe it was Game 4 against the Celtics. And in all of those other games in that series, and even in the Brooklyn series, he just looked like a shell of himself. He looked passive. He looked like he didn't want to shoot. I think it was that Game 6 against Boston where it was really bad, where he was like passing up everything in sight, passing up floaters he normally would have taken, passing up drives to the basket. And I think Doc Rivers definitely played a role with that. I don't think he coached James Harden the right way, and that's probably part of the reason him and Harden had tension, and Harden ultimately didn't want him back. So they go ahead, they hire Nick Nurse, and reports suggested that Nurse made a positive impression on James Harden or something of that nature. And then we got to this point like a week after they were eliminated, and it was like, all right, Harden's between his final two. He's either going to go to Houston or he's just going to stay in Philly. And it was interesting because if he were to leave Philly, it's not like it would be the worst thing in the world for the Sixers, because obviously he's shown his age, he's not the same player he once was, and he's not a necessity for the 76ers to keep, especially long term, given that's going to be what he wants. The only problem with that is that Philly would not be able to replace him because they don't have the money to do so, unless they were to trade a guy like Tobias Harris, which I have heard. But it's like, who are you going to bring in the offseason if all that transpires? Like Fred VanVleet? Like, Fred VanVleet's a good player, but he's coming off a really inefficient season. He's not going to get the same gravity that James Harden gets from defenses. So it's not like he's going to be making the plays that Harden made. It's not like Tyrese, Joel, Tobias. Obviously, he'd probably be out of the picture. PJ, whoever. All these guys aren't getting as good of looks if Fred VanVleet's the point guard. Let's just keep it a buck. So it was a slippery slope for Philly because you don't want to commit to him long term, but at the same time, you don't want to lose him for nothing. And then for Houston, it's like, let's just contend now. I mean, they hired Ime Udoka. Ime Udoka said in his introductory press conference that Houston was going to win and that he wanted to win. The losing was over. And we heard all these reports of all the free agents that Houston's interested in. Fred VanVleet, Dillon Brooks, everyone under the sun. They're interested in any contending level player. And James Harden was like the big fish. But all of a sudden, now all of that's out the window, both from Philly's side and from Houston's side. And he's opting into his player option. So why is that? And it's as simple as this. Teams do not want to commit long-term to James Harden. I just said it with the Sixers, and it was in the ESPN report that Philly told Harden that there was an understanding between the two sides that Philly did not want to commit long-term, and Harden wasn't cool with that. And so I think Houston was going to be his backup plan for that all along. But I think now that all of these free agents are considering Houston, because Houston has all of this money, and like I said, they're interested in the Fred VanVleets, the Dillon Brooks, the Chris Middletons, the Brook Lopez's of the world, and they're going to get some of these guys. But you can't get some of these guys if you're paying $47 to $50 million to James Harden. It makes no sense, especially given the timeline of their team. So why not keep the young core together, maybe trade like Kevin Porter Jr. now that you have Amen Thompson. And that kind of hurts me because I like Kevin Porter Jr., but I've kind of heard otherwise within the Rockets fan base. I don't think they like him very much. And now that Amen Thompson's there, he's probably going to be the primary ball handler, so they won't need Kevin Porter Jr. So maybe you trade him, but then keep the rest of the young core together, and then you got all this money where you can go sign Fred VanVleets and Dillon Brookses, and you can kind of build the roster that way instead of just going all in on an aging star that's going to take you nowhere but the play-in tournament. I think they realize that. They're moving on. So now James Harden finds himself in this weird position where he's been hyping up two teams for the past 5-6 months, and it's going to be neither of those teams. He's opting into his player option, 1 year, $36 million, and the teams that are interested, as of right now, are the Los Angeles Clippers and the New York Knicks. The LA Clippers are like perfect for this because they've been waiting on that perfect point guard, and I'm a little bit angry because I like Russell Westbrook, and I've heard nothing but that they're trying to replace Russell Westbrook. Obviously, reports like that haven't come out explicitly, but I mean, when Chris Paul first got moved to Washington, the first report that came out for him moving to another team was that the Los Angeles Clippers were interested and there was mutual interest. That's one point guard. And now here's James Harden, another point guard that they're interested in over the Brody. Is James Harden better than Russell Westbrook? Yes, he is. But as a Russ fan, it pains me, but you know, I'm going to put my biases aside and let's just talk about it. The Clippers need a guy like James Harden because they've needed that point guard for a long time. Russell Westbrook gave them some of that during the postseason, but obviously Kawhi and Paul George weren't there, so it didn't matter. But here's my problem. James Harden is also injury prone. He has a history of being injury prone. The hamstring obviously is still a concern. It's what's limited him ever since he's left Brooklyn, and that's been evident, and it's shown in his on-court performance. So now you're going to pair that injury alongside two other injury-prone stars, but I get it. I mean, you're not going to be giving up much because James Harden's about to get signed and traded, meaning the Sixers are likely going to get fleeced in any deal because you never get as much in sign and trades. And LA has multiple contracts to throw at him to match salaries. The most likely would probably be Marcus Morris and Norman Powell. Marcus Morris, obviously they tried to trade him to Washington in that 3-team deal to get Brogdon before they were concerned about injuries and whatnot. Oh yeah, that's another guy that they tried to get to play point guard, but that's besides the point. So they already tried to move on from Marcus Morris, and then there was a report that came out at the beginning of the offseason that they were willing to make Norman Powell available. So here you go, perfect storm. You can pair both Powell and Morris's salaries, and it'll match Harden's 1 year, $36 million perfectly. And that's one thing they can do. The Knicks are the other team that emerged as immediately interested, and the Knicks are interesting. because they do not have perfect salaries to match this contract. Obviously, they have Evan Fournier's big $18 million deal, or $19 million that he's getting paid annually. And that is definitely a salary that can be moved. But they don't really have a whole lot outside of that unless it's Brunson, Randall, or RJ Barrett. So do you really want to sacrifice either Randall or Barrett to go get James Harden? Because it's not going to be Jalen Brunson. And I don't even think it's going to be Julius Randle. In my opinion, Julius Randle deserves another chance to play alongside Jalen Brunson. And if you're going to go grab James Harden, I'd especially want to keep Julius Randle around because you need guys in the front court. And now you've got two great playmakers next to Julius Randle. So he really has no excuse to be bad in the playoffs. So that's interesting. So RJ Barrett could potentially be on the move if they're serious about James Harden. And then one final team that was not in the report, but I'm telling you to keep an eye on, is the Phoenix Suns. I mean, news broke earlier today that Kyrie was intending to meet with the Suns. That was his first free agency meeting. And obviously they can't afford him. Most of this is a leverage play from Kyrie, probably get more money from the Mavs, because I don't think he has any significant interests from other teams. But I think the Suns are serious. Like, if they could bring in Kyrie, they would. So then they'd have four guys that are otherworldly scorers, but no defenders and no depth and no payroll flexibility. And there was reports that they were interested in James Harden at the beginning of the offseason and that might be something to monitor. So keep your eye on the Phoenix Suns. How do they do it? Well, they still have DeAndre Ayton's contract. Obviously, reports suggested they were going to move forward, but that was just code for we want more than what teams were giving us for him. So we're just going to keep him because why not? He's talented. And, Frank Vogel gets the best out of bigs, so why not try it out? But don't get it twisted. If they can trade him for something that they consider adequate value in return, they'll do it in a heartbeat. They want him out of there. Let's keep it a buck here. And James Harden, given Matt Ishbia's track record with, going in for stars, Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, wants Kyrie Irving, he's going to go get James Harden if he can. So the only way it would work, because obviously Philly's not going to want DeAndre Ayton back, it would have to be a 3-team deal. Maybe something where, obviously Harden goes to the Suns, DeAndre Ayton can go to, the Mavs, and then maybe you get Tim Hardaway Jr. and Maxi Kleber if you're the Sixers. That's obviously not ideal, but it is something that could happen. But do not sleep on the Phoenix Suns to enter this conversation for James Harden. But this is just the first bombshell of many to come in the next day or two, and I can't wait. So stay tuned.